Again, welcome everybody to today's webinar on the immersive reading study and how to use it to better understand audiences. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and I'm happy today to welcome the two people who did the research from Portland State University, and I'll introduce them in a minute. To get us started, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we were involved in this project. The first is that research is one of BISG's 4 core objectives. So we work on serving as an information hub for the book business, promoting standards and best practices, conducting research that improves the transparency, efficiency, and effectiveness of the book business, and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion across the industry. So this is really core to what we do. And this also gave us an opportunity to join with the Panorama Project, which is an Overdrive initiative, IBPA, the Independent Book Publishers Association, ALA, in sponsoring the research. This is very consistent with our core strategies, which are to convene, amplify, and solve. And the amplify piece is really important here. This is a chance for us to work with others to do something jointly on behalf of the industry. In no small measure, this was also an important opportunity for us to work directly with the Portland State University faculty on a research effort. This is something we've wanted to do for quite some time. It's not necessarily well known or understood, but there are only a handful of higher education institutions focused on book publishing in the United States or even in North America. And Portland State is really leading in many ways in terms of its ability to conduct research and also to engage their students in that research where it makes sense. So it's a really good partner for an organization like BISG, and we're happy to work with them. And I think when you hear from Rachel and Kathi, you'll understand why. The work itself generated a picture of book discovery and engagement. At this point, it's a single look. It also answered some questions and posed several others that you'll see again as Rachel and Kathi walk through the research. There's an opportunity, we feel, to extend this work into a longitudinal study. We're really grateful to the folks at the Panorama Project for kind of contributing the majority of the funding for this first effort. And we're looking to do it again. Panorama is going to be working on some other projects. But if you're interested after hearing their work, we're going to be doing an outreach effort over the course of the summer to see if we can identify potential supporters for continued work in this area, which we think is important and we think is really relevant. So we look forward to sharing that as well. And if you're interested, even before, if you want in just more information, write to me. I'm brian@bisg.org, and we'll be happy to get you into a conversation. So I've mentioned their names already, but our guides to this immersive reading study, and they are truly guides because there's a tremendous amount of information in it, are Dr. Rachel Noorda and Dr. Kathi Berens, both from Portland State. Rachel, Kathi, welcome. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to kind of kick us off.
Thanks, Brian, for that great introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. Perfect. So here's us. Yes, we are here to talk to you about a lot of rich data. We're really only going to skim the surface today, but there's a whole great report to dig into, and also some longitudinal data, hopefully on the horizon in the future, for us to continue to do this research because we think it's really important. But there's lots to look into here about not only books, but cross media in terms of TV and games to help you understand your audiences better.
And a couple words about who we are. We are Dr. Rachel Noorda, who's the Director of Book Publishing at Portland State University. She's also an assistant professor of English. I'm Kathi Berens. I'm an associate professor of book publishing and digital humanities. Rachel is the principal investigator in this study. She's a data scientist and also an interpreter. I'm a humanist who helps to ask the questions and shape interpretation of results.
I like to think that we make a good team in that way. So yes, we're the ones working together here.
Yeah.
So a little bit about the report, particularly, maybe some of you have already had a look at it, but even if not, we'd like to help you be able to navigate it. So this report is full of granular data that can help you to understand lots of different and very specific audiences better. The granular data will help you understand audiences by gender, age, race, region, media format. So not just ebook, audiobook, and print, but also, as I mentioned before, TV, movies, and games. And then also multitasking and cross-media. It is a long report. It's 75 pages of data-rich content, but it's organized in a way to make it as easy as possible for you to identify the pieces that are applicable to you. So for example, there are call-out sections for particular groups. So whether you're an author, a publisher, a librarian, or a bookseller, there might be a particular section for you. And you can jump to these sections right away if you'd like. And since we know too that you are busy people, there is a short report as well. It's only 5 pages, and it includes some of the top level findings if you'd just like to access that quickly. So there's really no excuse not to dive into it right away after the webinar today. And then if you do want to know more about the methodology, you can also access the appendices, and that includes all of the survey questions, for example, and more about Qualtrics, which is the provider that we also use to help gather the pre-qualified book engagers. There were over 4,000 respondents, and they are representative in terms of age, race, gender, and region. And as I said, Qualtrics helped to deploy the survey, and the survey questions and results were peer reviewed by a cross-industry research committee. So Brian was on that committee representing BISG, and BISG, was also helping to fund the project, but there were many others representing there too, from for example, ALA and PubWest. So, a really wide range of folks contributing to just add their perspectives. So you can access the full and short report and all the appendices, and even the initial webinar too, where we presented findings on the Panorama Project website. So that's panoramaproject.org. So to just give you some of the top level findings to start from the report, we did use the term engagement in this survey as kind of a broad term to encompass many behaviors that include buying, borrowing, subscribing, reading, or gifting, and across all formats, so ebook, audiobook, and print. And this can be engagement with the whole text or with just a part of it. And we defined engagement in this way to capture all of the ways that, or as many of the ways as we could, that people engage with books, to gather a fuller picture of the landscape. So we wanted to capture the people who use books for reasons other than leisure, people who buy books as gifts, people who buy books for collecting or displaying, and people who buy or borrow books but don't always read them. So 53% of respondents are what we have termed avid book engagers. They engage with the most books per month, 4 or more. And one of the most interesting things is that these avid book engagers have higher proportions of Black, Latinx, and millennials. So 67% of Black respondents are avid book engagers, 59% of Latinx respondents are avid book engagers. And just to contextualize that, only 50% of white respondents are avid book engagers. So Black and Latinx engagers are communities in this that the report offers data about, so that we can better understand them, especially since they have chronically been underserved in our industry. And because one of the main objectives of the Immersive Media and Books project was to understand how people discover books, we looked at this in a couple of different ways: the how, the where, and the why of discovery. People discover books primarily from word of mouth, methods of recommendations from friends at 20%, recommendations from family at 12%, for example. It is worth noting that even this highest category of recommendations from friends is only 1/5 of the preferred how of book discovery. So in other words, discovery is really highly dispersed. There are really many ways that people are finding books, which in some ways is good news for us. And in terms of the where, people prefer to discover books by browsing in bookstores, first online at 30%, and then in person at 17%. An author is also important. People discover through author events, their favorite author. An author is also one of the main factors in terms of book purchase. So this leads us to the why people buy a book. Genre is the most important, followed by author, and then reviews. And people are largely unaware of the role that algorithms play in their book discovery. So we saw, for example, that only 3% of respondents said that they prefer to discover books through Amazon's recommendation algorithm, which is really low. The second objective of the project was to understand the role of libraries in the media ecosystem. And 75% of the survey respondents are library card holders. And these library card holders are buying books. In the general survey population, 1 of 3 people bought a book in a bookstore that they first found in a library. And likewise, about 1 in 3 people bought a book online that they first found in a library. So these and other data points demonstrate that libraries contribute to book discovery and purchase.
So let's dig into some of the demographic data that might help you understand our results even more clearly. The quotas that we gathered in Qualtrics match the US Census populations and ABA bookseller regions. So in the report, you'll find these 5 US bookselling regions: Midwest, West, Southwest, Northeast, and Southeast. There are 7 racial and ethnic categories: African or African American Black, Latino, Latina, Latinx, and just for concision, we used the gender neutral term Latinx to represent all of those people. European American or white, Asian or Asian American, Middle Eastern or North African, Native American, Native Alaskan, or other. And then generationally, there are 3 groups: millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. The report does have some specifically called out data about Gen Z, which is the youngest age group, but we didn't survey anyone under age 18. So the millennial category goes from ages 18 to 34. So I think one of the most interesting use cases for the granular data is to layer it. And in doing so, create pain points you might not have been able to identify, or target populations that need more from you or more from us. So here's one example of how you could use our data. So starting with the left column. So we know that Latinx respondents borrowed significantly more books during COVID, but they also have the lowest number of library card ownership at a little less than 70%. So from there we know, and then here's the data about their actual borrowing, 31.4% borrowed more print books during COVID compared to 23.9% of the general population. They borrowed 27.3% of ebooks compared to 21.8%, and 26.3% of Latinx people borrowed more audiobooks during COVID compared to the general population of 18.6%. So what to make of these 2 interesting pieces of data of more borrowing but less library card ownership? First, Latinx millennials were among the most avid book engagers, as Rachel mentioned previously. We also know that the Southwest region has the lowest rate of library card ownership also. So then there's that double layering of high concentrations of Latinx people in the American Southwest, which has a low library card ownership rate, and also Latinx people in general having a low ownership rate. So then maybe Southwestern libraries serving Latinx millennials should engage in discovery about how to better reach those people, because we know that they want books and we know that they'll use the library to borrow more books. This is just one example of how you can take different pieces of the report that relate to your particular business and identify pain points and identify potential opportunities. Next slide, please.
So as we mentioned before, cross-media was intentionally part of this report. So we didn't just look at books, but we looked at TV, movies, and games. And one thing that's really interesting is that it's the norm rather than the exception for engaging with either a book or engaging with a TV series or a movie to lead to discovery of content in another media form. So you can see here on the slide that 60.3% of our respondents said that engaging with a book led to discovery of a TV series, movie, or game. And 62.5% said that engaging with a TV series or movie led to discovery of a book or game. Engagement with a game was lower in terms of that then leading to discovery of other content, but it's still about approximately a third who engage with a game and then discover a book or TV series or movie from that engagement. So this data tells us that content and discovery in the media ecosystem are extremely interconnected. And cross-media discovery is more prominent for some segments, some particular audiences than for others. So as one example of this, audiobook engagers, so we looked at anyone who engaged with any number of audiobooks that weren't zero per month. And they have much higher levels of cross-media discovery than the general survey population. So you can see the contrast here that 75.5% are engaging with a book and then discovering a TV series, film, or game. And 77.8% are engaging with TV series or movie and then leading to others. And you even see with games how much higher it is. So that it's over 50% that are engaging with a game and finding a book, TV series, or movie from that. So there are other groups that have similarly high cross-media discovery patterns. So avid book engagers, for example, so those that engage with 4 or more books per month. Millennials also have really high cross-media discovery, and book pirates. So, audiobook engagers are just one example, but to kind of illustrate this. You don't just have to take our word for it, of course, about the power of cross-media discovery and engagement. There have been a lot of recent discussions in the industry, as we all know, that have been centered around cross-media. And platforms like Netflix have been developing more screen adaptations of books. Book-to-screen adaptations boost discovery. We see that in examples like Bridgerton, where print sales of the novel grew 3,000% and ebook 8,000% as a result of the release of the Netflix series. But it should be noted that even for adaptations that don't see the direct bump in book sales because of the screen release, there are benefits related to building the author brand and cross-media discovery that see trickle-down sales later on. Netflix and other streaming platforms like it also allow space for book-to-screen adaptations with smaller audiences too, rather than only big books and blockbusters. And Jane Friedman talks about this in the July 7th edition of Hot Sheet. Millennials are the age group to watch, as our report shows, because of the ways that they outconsume other categories. And the second most important factor in their book purchasing decision is reviews. Recommendations from friends, family, and social media are also primary ways that they discover books. And cross-media is also very high for them, as I have mentioned before. And since social media channels are particularly prominent in discovery for younger book engagers, it's worth looking at social media when talking about cross-media discovery. For example, Book Talk, which has been huge, and particularly for backlist and especially for young adult. And over 60% of TikTok users in the US are under the age of 30, which kind of confirms that younger book engagers piece.
And maybe, Rachel, before we go to the next slide, just one more note on this, which is that Publishers Weekly reports this week that Leigh Bardugo, whose Shadow and Bone YA novel was adapted into a Netflix show, has sold 421,000 books so far in 2021. So this is an incredibly fruitful place for book people to be thinking about developing strong relationships with theatrical adaptation. In a way, Hulu, Amazon Prime, which just bought MGM Studios, Netflix, these are all miniature movie studios now with their own built-in distribution systems. And so it is so much more financially feasible to release even pretty small books, which can have an enormous multiplier effect on book sales. Okay, on to the next slide. So let's talk about who these millennials are. First of all, they are twice as diverse as the general population. They also buy more books than the other two generational categories, Generation X and baby boomers. So this idea that we've had that middle-aged white women are the prized customers is just not borne out by the data. In fact, it is racially diverse millennials who are your best customers. And let's take a peek and discover why. First of all, just generationally, white millennials make up a smaller portion of their age group than white people in the other two age demographics. White millennials are 39% of the population compared to white people being 64% of the general population. Remember, these are all matched to US Census quotas, so they are representative of the general US population. Black millennials, Asian American and Asian millennials, and Latinx millennials are all twice as populous as the general survey population. Black millennials, 24.4% compared to 12.4% of the general population. Asian American and Asian millennials at 10.5 compared to 5.5 in the general population. And Latinx millennials at 24.5 compared to 12.4. So these younger people are more racially diverse. And as we know, they also engage with more books. Let's learn a little bit why. Well, in every context except gifting, they are the most engaged with books. Of course, it almost goes without saying that these are mobile first users who can move very easily between applications on their phones. So it's easy to go cross media and discover cross media because it is trivial to move between applications. Millennials browse shelves less often, even online. They're more open to recommendations than boomers and Gen X. They prefer word of mouth to search. So they're very attuned to what their peers or even aspirationally the people that they follow are talking about with books. 52.3% of them post online reviews. So that's an incredibly influential place to reach young readers. And 1 in 5 millennials attend live events. And remember that our data captured pre-COVID and during COVID behaviors. And so this, like going out again into the field, is a real discovery opportunity to see whether millennials are still going to show up at live events now that everyone's accustomed to doing what we're doing right now, which is streaming on Zoom. And then finally, only 10% of millennials browse shelves in libraries. In general, millennials are not using libraries as much as the other two populations, and that is a missed opportunity. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about what really influences millennials. And we want to talk specifically about the things that I've highlighted in orange, that reviews and front covers are significantly more impactful for millennials than they are for the general survey population. Like the rest of the general population, millennials discover books through genre. That's 39% in the general population and 37% with millennials. But look at reviews. 19% of millennials find books through online reviews, compared to only 15% of the general survey population. So if we think about not only current audiences, but future audiences, online reviews are going to be a very important space to manage author brand, publisher brand even. Author is 23% in the general survey population of the way that people find books, but only 16% with millennials. Price is pretty close to constant with the general population. In the general population, it's 9.2%. For millennials, it's 9%. But let's look at front cover. 8% of millennials think that front cover is an important way for them to discover books, compared to just 3.9% of the general survey population. And I believe that in a couple of moments, Rachel will tell you why that's the case. But for the moment, let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk about this concept from David Edelman. Some of you may have heard of him. He's the very famous Harvard Business School marketing guru. And early on in mobile computing around 2010, he started to notice a change in the classic marketing funnel, which, as you know, is outlined here in light gray. In other words, a person kind of starts their journey by considering the different products available to them. As they move further down the funnel, they are evaluating whether that product is something that they might want to purchase. And then typically in the classic marketing funnel, at the bottom of the funnel is the point of sale. And then the relationship is over. But what Edelman and his collaborators noticed is that because of social media, especially among younger users, there was something called the loyalty loop, which you can see outlined here in orange. The point of purchase was not the end of that relationship. In fact, it was an opportunity for a deepening of that relationship, where a person enjoys that book and then they go on to advocate for that book. And then they actually bond with others in their love of that book. So let's kind of think about what that means. This person, this lovely human that you'll see on the left side of the slide, is Aman Chaudhry. She is a book talker from Chicago, age 20. Books that can make me cry instantly have my money, she says. The first viral video of hers that went wild on Book Talk was a picture of her before with a shot of the book cover, Song of Achilles, which was mentioned, by the way, in Publishers Weekly as one of the best-selling books of this summer. So front cover, Song of Achilles. Then it's a shot of her wailing because this book has made her cry so much. And the sales of Song of Achilles shot up 400% after Chaudhry's video. And what's more, those sales have are 400% of the highest point, which was launched in 2012, but they've also sustained that level, which makes Song of Achilles one of the best-selling titles of 2021. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so as Kathi has already been talking about, one of really the most exciting findings of the report in this study has been how engaged Black and Latinx people have been with books. And we know that the industry has poorly served non-white communities in the past. However, this, as our data shows, is not because there's a lack of readers or buyers or borrowers. And as you can see from the chart on the slide, in print books, audiobooks, and ebooks, Latinx and Black respondents engaged with more books per month than the overall survey population. So the interest is there, the market is there. It's all about reaching those readers, understanding those readers. So I do want to talk a little bit more about what Kathi brought up, which is about front cover in making the decision to purchase a book for especially millennials and Latinx and Black millennials especially. So front covers matter more to Black and Latinx book engagers than the general survey population. Only 3.9% of the general survey population said that the front cover was the most important factor for them when buying a book, but double that, 7.1% of Black respondents and 6.1% of Latinx respondents said that the front cover was the most important factor. So the question is why? Well, one possible reason is that unlike white respondents, Latinx and Black book engagers don't see themselves represented on book covers. So representation, as we know, matters. We have an alumna of the book publishing program at PSU, Jenny Kimura, who is a designer at Little Brown. And when she was a graduate student in our program, she conducted some insightful research about the visibility of people of color on YA book covers. And she particularly was comparing 2014 to 2018 and used a quantitative scale and score to account for not only, how many human figures were represented on covers, but their facing orientation. So she found that even when the amount of people of color increased in samples that she was looking at between the 2 years, their visibility or their facing orientation became increasingly obscured. So the figure's position, the size, the body, face, eyes, and the level of obscurity, they were all important in the visual representation on the cover. So it's not just the quantity of diverse book covers that matter, but also the quality of these covers, how actually visible the people of color are on the covers. And in Jenny's words, a book cover is a key place for promoting visual diversity, and in the first encounter, and is the first encounter a reader will have with a book to know whether it is diverse. As another example from some of our great alumni, here also is Denise Morales Soto. One of the things we can think about is visiting audiences where they are to understand them better. So Denise is a 2020 PSU book publishing alumna and did research on Latinx science fiction and fantasy readers that the industry had largely missed. And she discovered that the most recent survey data about these audiences had found that typical science fiction and fantasy readers were white male and in the age range of 40 to 49. But that's because the survey that was conducted, which was in 2015, was distributed through the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America Facebook page and personal recommendation and certain Facebook groups. So in other words, the authors of this study went to places where white male science fiction and fantasy readers congregate, and they kind of missed where the Latinx readers of this genre were, because they didn't look to Twitter and use its hashtag functionality to look beyond the familiar places. Another thing that was different, a bit surprising, kind of to dispel this idea that boomer white women are the target audience for publishing, is thinking about men. So, this is the narrative in the industry that women engage with books, but men less so. But actually, our research found that men engage with more books per month than women across all formats. And they also buy more ebooks and audiobooks during COVID than women did. And they had a higher proportion subscribing to book subscription services too, as you can see from the slide. So then the question becomes, how do we change our thinking about, or how do we better engage with these men who have, we previously haven't recognized in the same way in the industry. So there are maybe a few things to think about. Although men engage with more books across all formats, they're especially avid in audiobooks. And print is still the top category for them, however, as it is for women. Men do not gift books as much as women do. 61% of women gift books, but only 17% of men. So, it's quite a difference there. So that's interesting to think about, especially if you create books that are gift books. Men do post more reviews in general for books, but also for TV and games as well. And they discover at higher rates through bookseller recommendations and through author events. That's both virtual events and in-person author events. So that's something else to think to utilize to your advantage.
So in the interest of time here in this last section on piracy, I'm going to move a little bit quickly through this so that we have enough time to chat. But first, I'll just say that we are defining in this study pirates as individuals who download copyrighted material for free for their own personal use, as opposed to people who are creating syndicates that sell vast quantities of pirated material. So we're talking about your neighbor. We're talking about ordinary people. You can see that across formats, pirates, who are the dark blue line in the bar graph, outconsume the general population. They bought more books in bookstores that they first found online, significantly more. You can see it's around 65%. You can see that they bought books in bookstores that they first found in the library. So that data about buying in bookstores and pirates is kind of important, because these are people who really value bookstores as community hubs. It's the main place where they're going to find the books that they have discovered illegally. Next slide, please. This is I mean, in the state of the industry, rights holders are nervous for reasons we understand. There's a lot of data that suggests, there's a lot of estimation that the industry is losing around $300 or $315 million annually in lost book sales to people who illegally download. But I do want to note that those data treat each download as a lost sale rather than discovery of new audiences. And I don't think we have data that supports that every single illegal download is a person who would otherwise have bought that book. We know that the American Publishers Association is fighting state legislatures in Maryland and New York that have mandated an increase in ebook sales at reasonable prices to libraries. Publishers graciously did this during COVID, that they made ebook prices more reasonable for libraries to increase access during COVID. And now there's a debate about whether pricing like that should continue after COVID. Next slide, please. So, I mean, and what our data suggests, that book piracy is more like discovery than it is theft. And so that term pirate is pejorative, because what it does is it ignores the fact that so many book pirates are also buyers, subscribers, and borrowers. 15.5% of the general population turns to piracy when a book is unavailable from the library. 78% of them own library cards. But as we saw a couple slides ago, pirates are out buying the general population in very significant numbers. 41% of them buy books in multiple formats. So if they like a book, they really like a book, they want to read it wherever they want to, on their phone, listening to it, reading it in print, they're buying books in multiple formats is more than twice the general population. Book pirates also discover more through cross-media than the general survey population. You can remember some of the data that Rachel presented to you earlier. These numbers are much more on par with the kind of super users, the audiobook engagers. So pirates, audiobook engagers, we wouldn't villainize audiobook engagers. I would suggest we probably shouldn't villainize book pirates, because they're also good customers. Next slide, please. So there is an important dimension to book piracy, which is that the race and ethnicity of book pirates, that more people who are not white are pirating books proportionally than people who are white. And you'll see that pirates on this graph are in gray and the general population is in blue. You'll see that in the white book pirates are slightly less than the general population, but that every other ethnicity except the other category, which is roughly parallel, every other ethnicity, more people are pirating. And that leads us to wonder whether increased pirating among non-white people is a result of unequal access to books. We know that there's a racial disparity in pay and in access to financial wealth. Is this a matter of equity to make more ebooks in particular available at libraries and make prices more fair so that non-white people can access them more? Next slide, please. So piracy results from unmet needs. Some of these needs might be access to a large catalog of titles. And remember that for millennials who get a lot of their entertainment via streaming, this is the norm for them. They're accustomed to sampling without penalty, millions and millions and millions of songs and movies and TV shows. And so it's a little different for them to have very, very tiny samples available of books. Another unmet need is access to titles that are difficult to get any other way. Access to titles that are unavailable in the pirates' geographic territory. And I would add also that younger people are reading huge amounts of manga and graphic novels, and those can cross territories very easily, and sometimes translation doesn't keep up with demand. And then finally, the free access, the price point that I was talking about in the previous slide. I guess I want to end this conversation about pirates, though of course we're open to talk with you about it, but end it by noting that pirates engage robustly in community. Almost 60% of them post reviews online, so they're very influential because they're making their opinions about books known. They read and write fan fiction at more than twice the rate of the general population. So pirate, and as we saw, they buy books at bookstores. They're very invested in local communities of book engagement. So that's that. Next slide, please.
So just to conclude our presentation today, we want to leave you with some takeaways. In thinking about piracy, we know this is, a delicate issue, and there's lots of work to be done. And honestly, a lot of our data raises more questions than it does answers. But certainly these data points around discovery are something that we'd like to explore more, and something for you to think about around rights and licensing and piracy. Cross-media discovery is the standard, it's the norm, especially for millennials and for some particular segments, audiobook engagers, pirates, and avid book engagers, so those who are consuming quite a lot of books. Center and think about men in terms of acquisitions and marketing. As an example, male millennials in terms of audiobooks, because we know that they engage very highly with that particular format. And then as you continue after this webinar to engage with the data and the report, think about how you can layer the data for your own business and your own pain points. As examples, for example, Kathi has shown how you can think about libraries and Latinx, millennials, and layer some of those things even with region to think about why some of those categories intersect for low library ownership, and what certain categories and stakeholders like libraries or bookstores can do to help remedy that sort of situation. And of course, pirates have pretty high book engagement. We know that they buy books in multiple formats, have high engagement for that. They are reading and downloading fan fiction at twice the rate as the general survey population. They're posting reviews of things. So, doing some exploration, not only with data, but in thinking for yourself and your own business about robust sampling and purchase, and how you might engage with pirates to discover more about these particular audiences. There's more discovery warranted, from you and from us in terms of going back into the field to learn more about them.
And then finally, we want to acknowledge and thank our funders, the Book Industry Study Group, the Independent Book Publishers Association, the American Library Association, and Overdrive. And
absolutely. And as we've talked about, we are hoping that this research can be something that is continued in longitudinal data and research, something that's continued on an annual basis. So, we hope that if you're interested, you'll get involved in this, perhaps by joining the research committee, becoming a funder through, and Brian can help in facilitating that. Sharing the results of the project. This is a free report. Please share it widely. We would love for the results to be shared really widely. And then, we have also just a little bit about, the timeline in terms of what we expect going forward. But thank you so much for listening today, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Kathi. I think that you've given a whirlwind tour, as you would acknowledge, of 75 pages of data, and I think it really does give a good basis for going into the report and making it kind of a front shelf item where you pull it down and say, well, what did it say about reaching men, or what does it say about reaching this particular community? We have a few questions that I wanted to ask, and maybe I'll start with one from Emily. I think this is in the context of groups that are influenced by reviews, and she was wondering if we made a distinction between print reviews versus consumer reviews posted online. And I think the answer to that is no.
It depends. So in that particular question, so I believe that question came up when Kathi was talking about the data related to what is the main factor in your book purchase, and reviews was one of the possibilities. And in that question, reviews did not get more granular than just asking about reviews. So no for that. But in terms of other discovery questions, like how do you usually discover books, we did ask some more granular pieces about reviews. For example, with millennials specifically, which was what Kathi was talking about, we gave options for reviews or recommendations in online newspapers, magazines, or blogs, in print, online newspapers, magazines, or blogs, and then reviews or book lists on book-related websites like Amazon, Audible, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads. And the highest one of those three categories for millennials was the reviews or book lists on book-related websites, which was at about 5.3%. The other two, print and online reviews, were relatively low, more like 1%. So just to kind of give you some context. So those were different questions, but they're both around discovery. So hope that helps.
And then there is in the full report, there is data. We did ask questions specifically about whether one was susceptible to reviews from influencers. So you can go into the report and even look to see if people were indicating that social media influencers influenced purchase of books.
Yeah, and in both cases, I was surprised when I looked at the data originally that the review answer was relatively low. I mean, 5% is not a lot, and 1% in some cases is very low.
Brian, this gets back to something Rachel brought up earlier about the heterogeneity of book discovery. In marketing theory, we know that people generally need about 6 touch points with something before it registers with them. So my suspicion is that that online reviews are more influential than people recognize. So the numbers are low, but I think that it's part of that mix that's largely invisible to a consumer, that they're pretty much aware of that last thing that tips them over to buy, which might be a friend saying, oh, go look at this. But maybe that friend read a review, or, maybe an author was in town and there was an item about that in the local newspaper, something like that.
Yeah, so go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, just that reviews are not the last touch point.
It might even be backgrounded. So Ram was asking a question, and this might draw upon other experiences rather than the survey itself, about book discovery for books published in a foreign language, potentially by foreign publishers. He makes the observation that U.S. publishers give very, very low priority in translated literature. And it just, do you have any experience in this area, or is this something that we would need to kind of think about studying in a subsequent effort?
I don't have a lot of data in this area, but it's something I have a research interest in, and it's something that other scholars have delved into a little bit further than I have. But it's I actually think of it as somewhat akin to some of the surprising data that we found with Black and Latinx book engagers, for example. We have narratives in the industry that keep the status quo and to, kind of keep a tradition running. And certainly there is a narrative with translated work that it just doesn't sell. And I don't know if there's really enough data to support that is true. First of all, because we don't publish enough translations in the US to really have data to support whether that's true or not. But the US is also very insular in that way. There are so many other countries that publish a much greater percentage of what they publish in their industries is from translated works. So, being part of the Anglophone sphere and then also being in the US, we're very insular in our industry. And I also think that harms, thinking about books as part of culture, I think that harms us. So I would like to see more data on that. I'm not sure if that's really something we can incorporate as part of this study, but it's certainly something I'm interested in. It's a great question.
We did some work earlier this year on the total size of the market for works published in another language translated into English, and it's relatively small. We're talking hundreds of books a year. Amazon Crossing is probably the largest seller,
Right.
publisher of those works, and the works published in the original language in the United States may be somewhat handicapped. We didn't study this, but it may be somewhat handicapped because the original publisher would be better served just simply trying to publish those and fulfill them in the U.S. market. So that may be a piece of it. I wanted to just go back because Kathi, you talked a little bit about not surveying anyone under the age of 18. And I maybe just spend a second explaining why that's the case, because it's for good reason.
Yes. We didn't survey people under age 18 because the human rights protections around getting getting institutional review support for conducting surveys, the restrictions around surveying, fragile populations like children are much more intense. We would be interested actually to survey younger people. It would entail seeking different levels of approval from the Institutional Review Board, which, just so you know, all universities have an Institutional Review Board, which protects the ethical standards for human rights engagement when any researcher contacts a person out in the world. So that's why we surveyed people 18 and over. But I think that there's a really good case to be made for surveying young adult readers. And that might be an area for future research if people in the industry wanted it.
Great, thank you. No, I thought that was an important part of the study, was that it was conducted in a academically rigorous and peer-reviewed approach and you held to that throughout. I wanted to ask both of you, it's pretty striking numbers about the cross-engagement related to audiobook consumers. And I'm wondering what do you think might be driving that? Is it that you can do more things while you're listening to an audiobook, or do you think there's a natural comfort level?
Well, there's no doubt that people do multitask when they're listening to audiobooks. In fact, people who are really passionate about audiobooks multitask less than the general population. So I don't think it's really about multitasking. I do speculate that it might be about the ease of moving in between platforms and the way that fandoms work among younger people, that when they like, let's call it a media property, when they like a title basically in one format, they want to seek it out in others. I think that the cross-media discovery work happening, even from games to books, is really striking for super users like audiobook users, pirates, millennials. So Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, sorry, I must admit, Brian, I was typing a response to Ram at the same time. So were you asking specifically about men with audiobooks?
Well, really, yeah. I mean, men are the more likely to engage. But I was thinking about the cross engagement numbers, which are much higher for people who start with audiobooks as their base. But it's I think it's to a certain extent the question's an unknown. We don't know the answer, but it may be worth exploring.
Yeah, again, this is, speculation, but I wonder if some people who don't necessarily categorize themselves as readers engage with audiobooks more, than those who the readers who think of themselves as readers and engage in print. And maybe that's for ease, maybe, whatever, because they're commuting or multitasking or something else. But I wonder if because of that, they're thinking of themselves more in just this connected media ecosystem rather than just readers, and I don't know, engaging in kind of a different sort of way than other readers are. It'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, and I think that kind of, as an answer, underpins part of what we were trying to achieve when we conducted this research, is to learn about the things that we didn't already understand, not look for confirmation of what we did. And I think you found a number of different instances of that. And Kathi, before I go, I just wanted to say something that I said to you in private. It reflects a bias of my own, dating back to research I did on book piracy in the late 2000s. That at the time I came to think of library lending itself as the last best defense against piracy. That effectively that there's a market for content at the price of zero, while we like it or not, it exists. And libraries at least give us an opportunity to sell books that are then lent to that audience.
Brian, I think that's very insightful, and I know your work from that period, and I think it's very smart. Another place to look would be to Audible's controversial return policy, which allows people to return an audiobook within 1 year of purchase. That is in a way a kind of robust sampling policy. And what I think that does, because Amazon, they're not dummies about selling things. And I think what it does is it keeps the buying momentum going. And what it does is it allows you to risk-free find books you're actually really passionate about. And this is a data set of one, but I will say that of the audiobooks that I've listened to, which are many, when I fall in love with them, I end up buying them as books. I end up advocating them. I mean, I am in that loyalty loop. I become a brand advocate for the books I love. And I think that Amazon's return policy with Audible is a good example of the phenomenon that you diagnosed quite a while ago with libraries and book piracy.
Well, there's a lot there, and I'm sure that there are probably people with a range of opinions that may agree or disagree with you and me.
I'm sure.
But that's why we have webinars. Believe it or not, we're at time. It's just flown by. Not surprisingly, I think all of our conversations have always gone over time. But today I promised you that I'd let you go at 2, and I am. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Kathi, for conducting the research and for being kind enough to spend some time kind of walking our audiences through it. And I look forward to doing more with you and with Portland State later this year and into the future.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate your leadership.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, Brian.
everybody.
Bye.